Hello, everyone, and welcome to our next DEY dialogue, Discussions in Defense of Childhood. My name is Denisha Jones, and I serve as the Executive Director of Defending the Early Years. And today I have two guests on to talk about fighting for universal childcare in New York. So I have two co-directors from the Alliance for Quality Education, Zakiyah Shaakir-Ansari, I think I got that right, and Marina Marcou-O'Malley are joining me today. Welcome, ladies.
Hi, thanks for having us.
Yeah, thanks for joining me. Um, so as sorry, let me just get this speaker right here. All right. So as maybe some of our listeners know and maybe don't, but we've been following the fact that New York City, New York State, it's not just the city. I want to say it's just the city, but it sounds like the entire state is poised to be the second state in the United States to offer universal child care. It was part of the campaign for Mayor Mondami before he was elected, and it looks like he's making good on it. There was an announcement. I believe last month with the governor, Kathy Hochul, about what they were planning to do. And so we wanted to reach out and talk to some folks who've been fighting this fight for a long time to give us your thoughts about what's happening and how we can support our listeners who maybe not are in New York State, but are advocates for universal child care and want to see more states take on this fight. So, can you begin briefly by sharing a little bit about your work at Alliance for Quality Education? I'm familiar with the organization, but some of our listeners might not be. Sure.
I can try. My internet is acting a little janky, y'all. So if you should jump in if y'all can't hear me while I try to move. But if you can hear me, okay. Hey everyone, thank you, Denisha, for having us. So AQE is a leading state, and for the last 25 years, we've been fighting to provide equitable funding of schools throughout New York State. So as you said, it's a statewide advocacy for us. We started as the organizing arm for an equity lawsuit called the Campaign for Fiscal Equity, which we know so many states today have one of those, which pretty much the state is not meeting its constitutional obligation to provide every child with a sound basic education. And after back and forth in the courts, we were able to get New York State to fully fund it with an additional, I think it wound up being almost $6 billion in 2023. But of course, equity was not reached because for all those years, we had been fighting for them to actually fund the thing, and it was never funded, fully funded in those years or 15 years or so. So we are still fighting to get that shifted and changed. Right now it's based on the 2000 census. Imagine we're 27, this is 27, and so we're a little behind. But we also transform into fighting for universal child care and then the school to prison pipeline work, culturally responsive for sustaining education, community schools. And so it was the funding for the sake of what is to fund all those things. And we organize parents, young people, educators, and community members from all across the state to fight for those things along with our.
Anything else you want to add there, Marina?
Nope, I think Zakia covered it.
Yeah. I know you guys did a lot of work, not just in childcare, right? I know about the school to prison pipeline work, right? Thinking about K through 12 broadly, but then also thinking about the needs of families with younger children, right? I think you said earlier in our conversation, Marina, that kids don't just become five one day they're born; they have 5 years, and their parents need services and support for them before that. So that is super important, and that's something that we've always done at Defending the Early Years, working with other grassroots organization groups that are looking at K through 12 and reminding them that education happens at birth, and some of the policies that are impacting K through 12, they pull downward into the early childhood space, and we want folks to be aware of those as well too. So thank you guys so much for this ongoing work. 20, I think you said 25-year anniversary coming up, right? It's kind of
25
like
years this year.
yeah, this year, right? It's good and bad, right? Because I think most of us who understand we don't want to be in this work for 25, 30 years because that means the problems aren't getting solved, right? Like we want to do this work and see a change and move on. But it's an ongoing process in a state like New York and as vast as it is with all of the issues that it's facing. And so we commend you for your commitment and all the work that you've been doing. So on your website, there's a visual timeline of the fight for pre-K, and it ends with UPK victory in sight. So that brings us to kind of where we are right now. So, Marina, can you tell us a little bit about, just to get everyone on the same page of what's happening in New York around the fight for
Yeah.
universal childcare?
Yeah. So right now, the state of universal pre-K in the New York State is really not universal, right? There are many school districts that have um, 4-year-old pre-K, New York City, all of our big cities outside of the city, and many small cities. So about 75% of the state overall has pre-K for 4-year-olds, and that is mostly full day. Full day meaning the school day, so 8 to 3 typically. But this particular executive budget for 2026-27 included a requirement for school districts across the state to offer 4-year-old pre-K if their resident families needed it and wanted it, which is the same kind of requirement we have for kindergarten. And kindergarten is pretty much universal in the state of New York. So it's not a mandatory thing that you have to attend, but it is mandatory for the school districts to provide if there is a need for it. And that is a good thing to have this kind of service and program for all the reasons that you mentioned, Denisha, that it is good for kids, it gets them ready for school, it sets them up for success, and so on and so forth. And brings a really good return on investment. But it is not the only thing that it was included in the executive budget. There was an expansion proposal for 3K for New York City, because New York City is not quite at the universal level with 3K, but it has a lot. It has some gaps that the governor proposes to fill. And then expanding to 2-year-olds, to 2,000 2-year-olds in New York City. That was part of Mayor Mamdani's campaign promise to expand childcare and pre-K to kids 0 to 5. And that is really part of the childcare system. And we expect the 2 and 3-year-old programs in the city and the 3-year-old programs outside of the city to really be inclusive of all the childcare programs that exist and are available to families. But focusing on pre-K, we see now that the beginning of the new school year, or by 2028-29, so the next 2 years, would be pre-K would become available for 4-year-olds across the state. And that combined with the advocacy and the push to make sure that the childcare assistance program, that programs for children 0 to 13 for aftercare are also expanded, that will actually continue having us on the path to universal childcare, which is really the goal here for the state of New York.
Thank you. That's a really good plan. And I see how it's progressing backwards, right? It's starting with the 4K gaps across the state. And I know this because I lived an hour and a half outside the city, which people said was upstate, which I'm like, the state is too big for that. But but the state is so huge. And I think people forget, right? Outside of New York City, even Buffalo, Rochester, I'm trying to blank on what are some of the larger cities outside of those three.
Syracuse, Yonkers.
Syracuse, Yonkers, right? These massive cities, right? That there are rural parts of New York, right? That don't even have 4K care, right? And
Absolutely.
so thinking about that is super important, right? Because we can't just focus on the most populated areas. And I love that it's a choice for families, because I think what universal childcare scares some families is that the government is going to force me to send my 3-year-old and 4-year-old to school, and I don't want to. And it shouldn't be forced, right? If you don't need to send your kid to child school, then don't. If you want to keep them at home and do play-based learning at home and all that, fun stuff, that's great. But so many families do need it across the state, but they're in very rural communities where there's no access to it. And so that's super important. And then thinking about, yes, the 3K, where are those seats coming up, and then eventually getting into the two care, I think is also super important.
Yeah. And
Yeah, go ahead.
the thing to
Hmm.
add there is that the system that already exists, that is already in place, the child care assistance program that provides access to free childcare to families that qualify, which, yes, is means tested and it is not ideal. And eventually we want it to be eliminated. We want childcare actually to be just like public schools, like a public good that everybody can access regardless where they live. But the program that currently exists allows families to make that choice, allows families with kids 0 to 13 to make the choice of the program that works for them and their family situation. And that is the kind of program that we need to have stable across the state and well funded so that all of the families that are actually eligible currently have the ability to access the program and access childcare where it exists. And because these two things cannot exist without the other. And we have to add funding to the childcare workforce so that they stay in the field. They stay in the field, and we recruit some more so that all of the programs actually are operating at capacity, and we have enough programs that have dark classrooms or the family childcare programs that don't employ additional teachers because they can't afford to. And as a result, we have diminished capacity. We have waiting lists across the state. Over 30 counties are now closed enrollment to the program because they can't afford, they don't have enough money. So we have to keep the systems well funded in both sides, both the pre-K system and the childcare system.
Yeah, absolutely. And that I think that goes to my next question was, we wrote a blog, I wrote a blog and we published it defending the early years with some ideas, some suggestions that we wanted to share with Mayor Mondami and his team about universal childcare, right? So we talked about mixed delivery is a must, right? It cannot only happen in public schools. And there's lots of reasons for that, right? Like one, it decimates the childcare availability. Providers lose access as 4-year-olds go into public schools. And most center-based care cannot run an infant toddler program because the ratios are so low, right? So if your state or county says that for every 4 or 5 infants and toddlers, you need an adult, right? Sometimes they're 1 to 4, 1 to 5, 1 to 6 ratios, right? That's more staff, that's more adults for children. But we know in a preschool, it might be 1 to 20 or 1 to 18 or 1 to 12, right? And so when you lose those 4-year-old spots, you can't afford, without charging outrageous monthly fees to parents, you can't afford to run an infant toddler. So I was in Washington, D.C. for most of my adult life, and every public school and public charter schools offer 3K and 4K. And so what happened to childcare centers, right? They started to close up across the area, and infant toddler care becomes too expensive for most families because the places that are remaining open are charging $30,000-$40,000 a year because they have to meet the ratios, right? Or it's just non-existent because the center-based care can't just survive on toddlers, right? And all the 3 and 4-year-olds go to public school. And we saw that happen in California that recently extended TK, transitional kindergarten for 4-year-olds, only in public schools. So centers across the state and many communities are being forced to close. So that's one thing we mentioned. We talked about our work around centering development and learning through play. I know people are like, let's get universal childcare going and we'll worry about what it actually looks like in practice. And I'm like, no, we need to think about the practice, right? Because often if it's in public schools, then the focus is on academics and learning. And not that that's not important, but the foundation of early childhood education and care is care and child development, right? Which builds a foundation for learning. And so that's one of the things we talked about. And then of course, focusing also some work that we're doing on identity development and really thinking about how do we start at a young age. So those were some of our advice. From your position, 25 years in the field and longer, right, in New York City doing this work, what are some areas? So Marina just mentioned wage compensation, and that's one that I said we don't have time to get to all of them, but that's a big one, right? And we can talk more about that. But what are some other concerns or issues that you hope to see addressed in your state as they move forward with universal childcare?
I would say that, if we believe that it takes a village, then anybody outside of this work is the village. So you're part of the village. Like that piece that you wrote matters because we don't have to make the same mistakes, right? We can see it from somebody who's done it and tried and tested it. We don't have to wait till we do it and happen. So thank you for doing that and actually bringing it to our attention. And like Marina is like the guru on childcare. And so these moments when I'm in these spaces, not only with her, but other folks who are like that, it is a part of my learning process of it too. And so just to even think that that many people had to close their doors, it was an unintended consequence At least on the, we know at overarching tends to be an unintended consequence that we often have to pay attention to because they have
Hmm.
devastating implications like that. That is devastating to have 12,000
Hmm.
folks, or I think it was, or whatever the number was, something
Hmm.
to close their doors, right? Or lose children, that many children, in a system that
Yeah.
can't hold that. And so I think that's part of it, like, which is making sure that we are addressing as much as possible by engaging all the folks that have a role in making sure that this is successful, that we engage in conversations, that we unpack what really needs to happen. So, but a lot of what we've been doing has been our focal point have been family-based providers. It doesn't mean that centers don't matter. It doesn't mean that other modalities don't matter. But we know that those are the folks who are predominantly women of color here in I'm sure across the country. In New York
Hmm.
State, they make less than 96% of the professions in the state. They are Black, brown, immigrant women. So
Hmm.
we know like all those folks and all those identities are already on the chopping block. And so that's why we often bring that into the space, including the children that they serve are those same children and same families, right? And so we hold them up not because they're the only ones who should receive this, but they're often the ones who are not talked about enough. And we don't want an unintended consequence of that. So part of that with this current administration is having these conversations so that doesn't happen, because it's not something we could afford to happen, knowing that 1,500 seats closed during, uh, COVID, that there will be more, but they were also the ones that were open when COVID was there. How did they became essential workers, right? And so they
Hmm.
play an
Hmm.
essential role. And I know we talked before too about how important it is for us to see them as more than just like designated babysitters because they don't have a center and it's, has decked out with all the things and you could come in and check in and all those things. Like anybody who has had to participate in trying to find childcare for their children, nieces, nephews, or whatever, know how difficult it is. And also, those places are often very much culturally responsive, right? They
Hmm.
often
Hmm.
speak the language that your child speaks. They are from the community, right? Because they open it up because they see the need, and so that's the thing. And they should be. And so while that's a big picture for us in New York State, that is one real major part, because otherwise we set up the whole idea and mission towards universal child care. We set it up for failure if we don't, specifically in New York State, make sure that we fund the workforce, thriving wage, not poverty wages. Right now, many of them are making $7 an hour. Home-based
Yeah.
providers, $7, y'all, not
Yeah.
17, not 70, $7 an hour, and on public assistance and all those other things. That's unacceptable. They take care of our most precious New Yorkers, our children, from 0 to 13, and they should be treated better.
Yeah, absolutely. I know some family childcare providers in New York. One in particular that I'm thinking way upstate, in the up a mountain hill, and just the struggle to she employs, family members, one of them's her daughter-in-law, right, and other kids. And I remember this coming up as an issue that her daughter, her grandchild goes to her center, and so but because the child's mother, her daughter-in-law works there, she can't get subsidy coverage, right? Because they're like, your kids at work with you. And I reached out to some folks who do some advocacy, and they're like, yeah, we've been fighting this for years. It seems it's such a small hurdle. Like, it doesn't matter whether you're work there or not. You're working and your kid's in care. And this woman is stuck between trying to pay this woman, her daughter-in-law, or provide a free space to her grandchild, but then she's not bringing any income because that free space, it's ridiculous to be put in that situation. And I just, when you hear about things like that, and it's like, why? It's people's mindset that somehow working in a childcare center, and just because your kid's in the same room or next door, you're not really working. Yeah, she's still an employee. And when the state shows up for licensing, she's still an employee doing everything that she's supposed to be doing. It just so happens that her child, and that's what it's supposed to be, right? A lot of women go into childcare thinking, I have young children. My children should be able to be in this space with me. That makes it easy for me to get into the workforce. And then they come against systems like this that say no, right? And that's just one of it. And so, yeah, running a business from your home and trying not to keep charging parents, but not making any money, barely breaking even every year, and not breaking even, right? Owing money, right? It's very difficult for a lot of the work
Yeah.
that these women do. Yeah.
We have had number of providers who have shared their stories with us. And one in particular has shared how she had to close her program.
Hmm.
But the whole time she was operating, there wasn't a time that she wasn't ever in eviction court
Mm.
because she couldn't make ends meet. And we say this all the time. All of these people, all of these women actually practice this because they love kids and they love their jobs. There comes a moment though where love doesn't pay the bills, doesn't put food
Yeah.
on the table
Yeah.
for your family. So you have to make a choice and you leave and you go to something else because you have to provide for your own family.
Hmm.
And putting people in that place to choose between doing a service to not only their families but the families in their community. And most of these programs are quality programs and
Yes.
have
Yes.
and build on the years of experience and socialize our kids so that they can succeed in school.
Hmm.
And we do not place value on that, right? Not only do we not place value on that, but we also ignore as a state the fact that this is investing in childcare is the best economic development strategy that we can employ. There is no other thing that can provide a return on investment as high as investing in childcare and early education. And yet, we continue not investing in the workforce, keeping our childcare system in within limited capacity, not serving enough kids, not putting money in the pockets of the providers and the educators who are in the field, and causing the parents enormous stress and anxiety to find something else, putting economic stress on them, and they end up leaving the workforce. So, who benefits from all of this? No one, not the
No one.
state,
Yeah. Mm-mm.
not the families, not the kids, not anybody. So we need to actually change our mindset in this state, which is it's great that we are talking about it now so much because it's starting to change. The winds are changing.
Yes.
The
Yes.
people are finally understanding and talking publicly about it. And it is up to us to hold them accountable and make sure that they put their money where their mouth is.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. And that's what we want to continue to do. And that's what, we hear from folks all the time is that, being that voice, reminding teachers, you're doing good work and you deserve to be fairly compensated. You deserve to be treated as the professional, as the expert that you are. And you deserve the permission to do good work and to build relationships with children that are important. And so, yeah, that work and compensation piece is so important. And also that really ability to, like you said, meet the needs of children in different ways, right? I think some of the issues around early childhood education is like the schoolification of the early years, right? And again, I think that comes from putting 4-year-olds in public schools only, right? And remembering like, yes, public schools are great and our kids are going to go there eventually, but they're not equipped and they're not designed to meet the needs of developing young children. Developing young children need spaces that understand child development and educators that understand child development, right? There's a huge overlap in most states and all states between early childhood certification and elementary, so that a lot of kindergarten teachers actually went to elementary. And the difference is one class on child development and 3-4 semesters getting child development and getting varied experiences, right? We would put kids in centers with young children, with toddlers, so they can see the gamut of early childhood and then go into public schools to do their student teaching, as opposed to only seeing learning happen in a public school space. That's going to really influence what you do in the classroom. And so I think it's so important when I think of childcare programs like the one I was talking about, where children are free engage in child-led free play. The focus is on social emotional learning. It's on children being safe. It's on children learning to communicate, right? Building all these foundational skills. A place like that is often kept out of subsidy systems because they don't follow an academic curriculum. They don't do all of these other things. So I think that's an important piece to think about, because when we think about the family childcare providers, right, that we want to see, they need the flexibility to provide care in culturally relevant ways, as Zakiyah mentioned, right, that are often not following these kind of type of scripted curriculums, right? So I really hope that New York can have diversity in its approach, right, to this, so that all providers are welcome and that parents really have true choice, right? We hear about school choice all the time, but really it's about schools choosing children and not about parents saying, you know what, I like that place where the kids are outside, like it's a nature-based preschool and the kids are outside all day long. And I love that even in the winter. Or I like this place that really focuses on, these types of experiences. And maybe some parents parents do want a school environment, and that's okay, but they have that option and not that, nope, you're receiving a subsidy. This is the only type of care that you can get, right? Because I think that's another issue that we've seen in so many places. Well, I want to give you guys a chance to close out by sharing what can we do to support you guys in New York. Again, DEY is a national organization. Many of our listeners are all over the country. We're incorporated in Massachusetts, but we're all over. But people are really excited about this and they want to support it, and they want to see it happen in New York to be a model that other states and other cities can also learn from. So, any ideas or suggestions on how we can support both Alliance for Quality Education and just the fight for universal childcare in New York?
I mean, I guess that was some of the things that come up for me is like more of the when you're seeing things happening, like chiming in on best practices, like things that lessons learned are really going to be important for us. We are
Mhm.
paying attention because, again, we don't want to make a mistake. We will make mistakes, but we want to be able to, any that we can avoid making are
Mhm.
helpful, right? We know we are different than other parts of the state. We get it. But sometimes those little things that paid attention to, I paid attention to that little thing and it made a difference. Doesn't matter where you live. And so I think that's one thing. Folks should follow us. Like we're always doing actions. And if you know people in New York and we're doing an online action, please like send it to them. Tell them to send an email to their governor or whomever about it. And then I think just constantly, like whatever you can do to support, like sign up for our email list and you get those things because sometimes, again, knowing that where we're at and what people are paying attention to New York right now, um, if there's anything we're doing that can help support you in this journey as we're moving along and turning along, like this is the village we're creating it, and we want this to work because we know because we want it to work because we want it to work for children and families, but we know the world is watching actually literally, not because they want us necessarily to see us succeed because some people do, but because actually they don't want to see some people succeed, right? And so we want to be the best we can be for kids because we know it works. And organizationally, again, we're not just universal child care. Our bread and butter for the last 24 years or 14 years before we started doing universal child care was around pre-K and K to 12 education. So we understand the continuum, how important it is to build a system that starts from the very beginning and works its way up, but also centers racial justice.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
And the only thing I would add to that is that I would offer our help and conversation and thinking through, well, to anyone who's listening. AQE is one of the core convening groups of the Empire State Campaign for Childcare, which is the statewide campaign for universal childcare in New York. We have over 100 organizations involved, and many of us are talk with people from other states all the time, and we exchange ideas and uh, practices, ask questions. Like we are happy to to continue that, and we would love to hear from you if you have anything that you want to reach out about. And yeah, what Zakiyah said, support us, AQE aqeny.org is our website, and you will find links to the campaign there and to all of our material. And yeah,
Great.
sign up.
We'll definitely share all the links to your social media and to your website when we post this recording in our newsletter later this week, actually, and up on our website as well, too. But thank you guys so much. And it sounds like maybe that'll be the next step, convening a group of folks to come together and listen and hear what's happening, what works in childcare. That sounds like something that we can definitely do and support. So be on the lookout for more messages from me around that. And we'll get some other folks that we know who are doing this work, too. And I think, like you said, like learning from each other. You can't avoid all mistakes, but you can recognize them and be quick to react to them and to change them and to learn from them. And that's what this is all about. So thank you so much, Zakiyah, and thank you so much, Marina. Congratulations on your anniversary at Alliance for Quality Education, and we will continue to watch and support all of your good work.